Welcome to Cryptotexty talk show. Today our guest is Matthew Spoke, founder of AION. Hello Matthew, welcome to Ukraine. First question I would like to ask, what's your impression about Ukraine? You've been here only one day, and yesterday was presentation of AION in Blockchain Hub. What's your impression about some part of crypto community in Ukraine and Ukraine in general?
Yeah, I mean, we've been in Kiev for one day. We've been doing a few meetups across Eastern Europe, but it's my second time in Kiev. I was here last year as well in September. We know that there's a very technical community here, lots of engineers, lots of really good projects. We met some mining companies yesterday. Very interesting community, and the Crypto Hub is a very cool location to host meetups here in Kiev. I'm sure we'll be back pretty soon.
Great. Please tell a bit about AION briefly, because not all of our viewers know about it. What's it about?
Sure. Yeah, AION is a public protocol that we've been developing for over a year now. Our team is primarily based in Canada. We have a team now in Shanghai, China, a team in Barbados, and we have a partner in Romania that we work with as well. Now my co-founder and I, Jin, have been spending a lot of time traveling, starting to meet new developer communities in different parts of the world to get more developer collaboration. So that's part of our reason for being here in Ukraine, to meet different developers. The focus of AION as a protocol is we're building a new public infrastructure that focuses on long-term scalability and interoperability of different public networks. So if anybody has heard of AION before, they probably know about us as a solution for interoperability. Our roadmap really has two general focuses. One is designing a mechanism for a public network to be more scalable, and the other one is to make sure that that public network can communicate and interoperate with other public networks and kind of create a network of many blockchains, if you can call it that. So that's the high-level design of AION. A lot of details and specifics in terms of how it works, but that's the general concept.
And as I heard yesterday, AION stands for Artificial Intelligence on Networks.
It's one of the acronyms that we use. I mean, AION is I think a design that we think will be very relevant for a lot of future purposes. One of the kind of passions that we spend a lot of time thinking about is this long-term vision as to the future of the internet, decentralization across the entire world and across the economy, and a big topic that we think is going to become increasingly important is how do you create trusted artificial intelligence. And trusted artificial intelligence to us will only be possible with scalable decentralized infrastructure. So, we often say that AION can stand for artificial intelligence on a network, but it also has other meanings depending on the purpose.
Yeah, one of the purposes and one of the practical solutions which AION provides, as I understood from yesterday's speech, is making a bridge which would connect blockchains. And right now, as I see, it's a big need because many new projects, startups, ICO, they create their token on ERC20, but with the purpose only to collect money for ICO, and then they have a goal to create their own blockchain. And then how to move it? There is atomic swap, and of course there are solutions, but maybe not easy and not ideal solutions. So how your solution would work?
Yeah, so maybe before I get into the specifics of our bridge design, there's two things about AION. We have an immediate roadmap and set of engineering milestones for short-term functionality that we're working on. One of those is the bridge that we've been designing, which is in its first design, a token bridge to go from Ethereum to AION. I can talk a little bit about that design, but I think more relevant than that is kind of understanding, when we go back to what's the long-term vision of what we're building with AION, understanding that this is like a 10 to 20 year evolution of infrastructure. So, we're trying to build what is the equivalent of the internet in our industry. If you go back to early days of the internet and you realize, we're still kind of in that not even dial-up modem. We're going to have really slow connection. We're going to have pretty bad bandwidth. We're going to have lots of clunky kind of applications that are not perfectly smooth from a user's perspective. And we think that we really need kind of 10 years plus to make this infrastructure massively scalable for the future, businesses that are going to get built on top of it. So when we look today at how do you build applications on top of Ethereum, on top of AION, on top of Bitcoin, they all have these same characteristics. They're all pretty slow. They're all pretty inefficient. The user experience is pretty broken. generally speaking, we're like still in the early 90s, if you use this analogy of the internet. What we're trying to do is start to make some of these functional pieces of infrastructure to start maturing this infrastructure. One of those is the bridge that we designed. So the bridge is the first connection that will be the first production system to go and allow for assets to move across two chains. And in this case, it's between Ethereum and AION. It's essentially a decentralized communication protocol where we can have a group of nodes that have to recognize and witness transactions on one blockchain and then move those transactions to another blockchain. So if you think about it in the example you gave of a token, like an ERC20 token on top of Ethereum, can you move that token to another blockchain without centralization, without going through an exchange? And today that's not possible. So we think there's a lot of early use cases and immediate use cases, but again, we still kind of consider this like dial-up modem internet. We're not yet, talking about fiber optics, which is where we hope to get in the next 5 to 10 years of roadmap.
And also, are you planning to make a decentralized exchange, or maybe your AION can be used in the creation of decentralized exchanges? Because right now there exist Ether Delta and IDEX. I use both of them, but they are not user-friendly, and especially for new people. It would be easy to get lost there. And, what's the solution? And maybe, as you observe the industry, maybe there are some other decentralized exchanges evolving. Binance announced something like this.
Yeah, I think as the AION Foundation, we're not going to build a decentralized exchange. AION Foundation has a very specific and narrow mandate. The AION Foundation works on research and development of the protocol, and then works on encouraging adoption of the protocol. We don't build applications, we don't build businesses or products, but we do envision that the AION protocol can and will be used for decentralized exchanges. Today, the design in the market that is existing is that decentralized exchanges exist on top of one blockchain. The two you mentioned, IDEX, Ether Delta, these are Ethereum-based decentralized exchanges. So they can move assets on top of one blockchain. Decentralized exchange that can move assets between blockchains is not yet possible. Is it going to be user-friendly and efficient? Probably not immediately. These are going to be, the moment you start crossing chains and you want confidence and you want decentralized confirmation, it's going to be a slow process. The most efficient way to build user-friendly like products today is centralization, right? So you look at all the big exchanges, Binance or Poloniex or any of these big exchanges, the reason they can be efficient is because they're centralized. It's going to take us time to replicate that efficiency in decentralized exchanges or decentralized products. But I think it's a natural evolution that we have to go through. But we do have a few companies that are starting to investigate the possibility of building decentralized exchange using the AION protocol. And we'll support some of these projects, but we won't be involved in developing it ourselves.
Yeah, I see. Right now, these days, it seems that EOS is trending topic. What would you say that if somebody asks, like, what's the main difference between you and EOS? Because it seems that some or solutions EOS also provide, and they plan to.
Well, I guess the simple answer today is functioning software is the difference. The long-term answer is really a difference of philosophy. I think we have two kind of core designs that I think are very different than EOS. So one, when we started our design around interoperability, we very specifically started focusing on how do you cross between different protocols. The original EOS design was very much a scaling solution for a single protocol. How does EOS scale across many? I know they're starting to talk more about interoperability today, but it's been kind of like an afterthought and an addition to their roadmap. So there's this concept in our roadmap around multiple protocols coexisting and interoperating with each other. I think that's kind of core number one. The second big difference is that we have maintained a significant focus on appropriate decentralization. I think the big challenge that this market is having is that we get lost in the discussion around performance optimization. We get lost in the conversation of transactions per second. 10,000, 100,000, 1 million transactions per second. All of these things become like marketing slogans for projects, when the reality is that the majority of these projects doing this are either, one, being dishonest, or two, they're making significant trade-offs in the decentralized architecture of their system. So if you start talking about how do I run a decentralized architecture, but everything is centralized into 21 supercomputers, then all of a sudden it's not really decentralized anymore. You'd had to reintroduce trust between these supernodes in a system. So when we started designing for AION, we wanted to make sure that a core design principle was that we maintain decentralization and like as decentralized as possible. So over time, we will find ways to make this more efficient. Our perspective today is that if you focus too much on performance optimization, you're forgetting the reason that we started designing decentralized architectures. So we keep decentralization kind of core to our focus. The other thing that I think gets lost in a discussion around performance these days is this kind of artificial discussion around performance without talking about data requirements. And so if you look at any inefficient blockchain today, we talk about Bitcoin, we talk about Ethereum, these are the mainstream popular blockchains today that can maybe do 20 transactions per second and already have a massive data problem. Because if you're replicating this database in the Ethereum context, you have almost 1 terabyte of data that's based on 20 transactions per second.
How many transactions per second you think should be like the minimal in order to compete maybe with Visa, MasterCards, with banks?
We're nowhere near that as an industry. I think the challenge is we talk so much about this. You know, let's look at Ethereum as an example, 20 transactions per second, and maybe once every 3 or 4 months, the network hits a peak, right? Generally speaking, 20 transactions per second on Ethereum is more than enough for the requirements of the market today. So day-to-day transactions. Agreed.
Like situations, CryptoKitties or some
Yeah. Of course, we need to scale these things, but to start looking at how do you design a system that allows for 100,000 transactions per second when the market is only using 10 transactions per second, right? So I think overly promising today without really thinking about the long-term architecture is unnecessary, and it means that people are making trade-offs in their technical decisions that are not necessary today, and they sacrifice some of the benefits of decentralized technology. I mean, we think that over time these networks need to be infinitely scalable, but in our mind there's two layers of that. There's how do you scale a single network, and then how do you scale across many networks, right? So how do you scale a single network? We'll always have a finite limit. You know, and there's different architectures that we're investigating, you know, whether you're talking about chains of blocks or whether you're talking about graphs of transactions, there may be different ways to architect these systems for better scale, but then you might still run into a finite limit of a single network. And then you can replicate that limit by having interoperability between multiple networks. So theoretically, if you multiply different networks and connect them to each other, maybe there's no limit to transaction throughput, but you're going to be separating it across multiple blockchains over time. You know, Visa, MasterCard, these credit card systems, maybe they do a few 100,000 transactions per second today. There's no way in the next 5 years that we're solving that as an industry. So as long as we stay focused on that core infrastructure and focus on some of these rails for this transaction throughput, I think we need a little bit more time to research that as an industry and not overpromise.
Yeah, so like you made an analogy with early days of internet, of the dial-up internet. So if we are right now in the stage of dial-up internet, it's maybe okay for now in terms of transaction per seconds, because that early days there didn't exist such things which require like a higher bandwidth. And
well, it's like can you build
already like step forward, like people could get calls there, could download different books like music, and could even play computer games.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the internet 20, 30 years ago, you know, voice over IP, either non-existent or very, very inefficient. Video streaming, non-existent, not very efficient. It was a very simple protocol. It was, how do I collect information, primarily text, eventually photos, but like the speed and bandwidth of these systems were really slow for 10, 15, 20 years, right?
To wait for the page
to kind of load, and
it's like the way you have to wait now for transaction to be confirmed.
And I don't even think we're at dial-up internet yet. I think we're pre-dial-up internet. You know, we're still talking about having 100 networks that don't communicate with each other. So the first connection that we start to build, you know, maybe our bridge design as a part of this is the first time that we actually start being able to move data and transactions from one network to another. It's likely going to be very slow. And then over time, we'll optimize these designs.
Also, you mentioned that you have a proof of work algorithm similar to the cache, Equihash. I'm more familiar with Zencash fork of the cache, and they have system of secure nodes and super nodes. And what's actually good for secure node, you only need to have like a 42 Zencash, and it's affordable. Right now, it's maybe something around $1,500, and they have actually 11,000 nodes, which is, I think, is good for this organization. You will have like similar system.
Yeah, so this is pretty well articulated in our white paper. It's not implemented in our current public network. Our current public network, as you said, is a proof of work algorithm we call Equihash 210.9. It's a more ASIC-resistant version of Equihash that we developed for the first release. Our long-term roadmap for our consensus algorithm is more of a hybrid delegated proof of stake. So we talked about, if you read through our white paper, you'll realize we talk about 3 general actors inside of our consensus algorithm. You have validators who participate in kind of block creation and transaction confirmation, and then you have people who stake and people who compute. And the people who compute, we're working on an algorithm called proof of intelligence, and the people who stake, they can actually participate in consensus by putting financial stake into the system. So not too different than a lot of these delegated proof of stake systems from that perspective. But when we move down the roadmap in this consensus algorithm, there'll be a way for people to participate as validators, and there'll be a tier system of validators, or participate by providing computing power or stake to the system.
And also, I think what's important is to have no fees for transaction. Like for example, Steemit blockchain has this, so it would be affordable to use for general audience, and especially for new people who come to crypto. They see sometimes that, for example, Ethereum transaction, it's costs like a few dollars, for example, if you're sending tokens. And like EOS is claiming that they will have no transaction fees. What about AION, and what do you think about this, like in general?
In general, I think it's important that the economic design of these systems be properly thought through. I think the incentive of why people participate in these networks, why people want to confirm transactions, is a big part of this. The challenge today, I think, is more of a user experience challenge. So for one, it's expensive to run applications on top of Bitcoin, on top of Ethereum. Everybody understands this. So we can make this more efficient over time. And you feel it very directly in the user experience. So you build an application and you have to attach a gas fee, transaction fee, et cetera, et cetera. I think over time this is going to be less and less obvious to the user. The user may not even experience this. It'll just happen kind of in the back end of these applications. I do think that there's a need for kind of appropriate economic incentive to make sure that the network operators, the miners, and the transaction confirmation process, depending on the system design, needs to be economically incentivized. So we have in our system 2 layers of economic incentive. You either participate as a node in the public network. You earn from transaction confirmations and block creation in our current design. And then you also can participate in bridges and these connections between blockchains. So moving data or moving transactions from one blockchain to another, a node could theoretically be earning revenue off of this process. So if you take the economics out of the system, you take the incentive of why people will do this function. So I do think in our current design of the AION public network, we've been able to make more efficient the fee structure. So if you look at running an application today on Ethereum versus on AION, we can reduce the cost of execution by something like 40–50%, which is kind of the gas cost in Ethereum. So we've been able to optimize how do you do calculation of cost based on instruction sets in a smart contract, for example, so that it becomes more efficient. So you take exact same application, you can run it cheaper and faster today, and then over time we'll optimize that design. The new virtual machine that we're working on will again be a significant improvement in terms of efficiency for how do you actually calculate transaction instructions, and how do you prioritize which transactions get processed through the VM. This is a project we're working on called the AION virtual machine that'll have a lot of new efficiencies designed into it.
This bridge, you will start with moving like your tokens, which are now ERC20 to AION. So that would be like first bridge. And it should happen somewhere this summer of 2018.
We're pretty close to publishing kind of a beta version for testing, for people to experiment a little bit with what that looks like. It'll be like a testnet to testnet bridge between the Ethereum testnet or one of the Ethereum testnets and the AION testnet. There's a lot of emphasis on making sure that the design of that bridge is very robust and very secure. We've seen lots of challenges in the industry of people publishing code too quickly and having massive challenges on the back end of that, money being frozen, money being lost, or whatever the case might be. So we're gonna take it conservatively. We intend to publish a functioning version of the bridge sometime this summer for people to use, but we'll probably be very incremental in terms of how much we move over, because we have to look at the entire token supply of the AION token on the Ethereum blockchain today, something like 465 million tokens, and over time we have to migrate those over to the public network. That's not going to be one giant migration because it's very, very risky in terms of like the value is associated with that. So we're going to go very incrementally. over the course of several months. The first kind of production version of that will be available sometime early this summer. Yeah.
And do you have already applications of other projects which are maybe doing ICO now or thinking about doing to use AION for?
Yeah, we have a few projects being developed right now. I say we have some companies that are working on the AION protocol that are going to be doing applications, wallets. There's a few ICOs planned for second half of the year that'll launch on top of the public network. So that's something kind of coming up. We had one of these projects was presenting. We had our first developer conference, AION X, about 1 month ago, and one of these companies was presenting there. So there are a few projects coming up that are going to be announcing their intention to do an application on top of AION.
You will travel a lot presenting AION and to many countries, many conferences. You've been recently on Consensus. What's your impression about Consensus and the general thought where the industry is moving?
Consensus was
interesting to ask, like, how important is for new companies to be there?
It
seems that Consensus is making a lot of hype and.
It's noisy, you know, this industry is noisy everywhere you go. You're either in the crypto markets, it's very noisy, or you go to Consensus and kind of more enterprise market, also very noisy. I mean, there were almost 10,000 people at Consensus this year. It's very difficult to kind of to stand out in a group like that. It was a great conference. We had a great opportunity to do, we did a panel discussion at Consensus on interoperability with Litecoin and Ripple and Parity Technologies. I was on a panel with these three. I think we had a very good discussion around the challenges and developments that are happening around interoperability. We had a really good time in New York in terms of just, you know, lining up lots of new conversations with new companies that are learning about AION for the first time, that want to either do an integration into their current product or build a new product on top of AION. So for us, it was very successful. We also did a meetup that week in New York. We kind of connected with the local developer meetup community in New York. But overall, I think it was a great week. But the conference was very, very busy.
So, for example, if the one has option to go one time to Consensus or to go, I don't know, for 10 or 5 conferences in other places, what would you think the best solution? It seems it's better maybe to go to 5 other conferences, because on Consensus, where so many people, you can be easily lost.
Yeah, I think it depends on what you're building and what your product is. And, you know, for us, AION's success will come from the fact that it will be globally recognized, global awareness, there'll be global community developers. So we can't solve for that by only going to New York. We have to be in many cities, many countries all the time, right? Meeting with developers, going to hackathons, going to different small conferences, small meetups, et cetera, et cetera. So that's our big focus. You know, of course, when Consensus happens, these types of bigger events, you know, we'll participate. We're also starting to do our own developer conferences, AION X, which will be a much more regular event that we do in different parts of the world, to bring developers to learn more about our roadmap, to meet our engineering team, to kind of get aligned with our vision. But there's no shortcuts in this market to global awareness. If you want global awareness, you need to be globally present, and globally present means going around the world and doing events, right?
Yeah, also many people were expecting that during Consensus and after there would be like boom in the whole crypto market, but it didn't happen.
Yeah,
what's your opinion on this?
I think people get caught up in the excitement, right? Last year there was a very one-off, very strange week at Consensus in 2017 that led to a big kickoff in like a lot of the hype in the crypto markets. People were expecting that maybe that was going to happen again this year. I think it's healthy where the market is at right now. I think this amount of kind of like stagnation in the market allows for us to be more confident that the projects that are actually building today are focused on the right things. They're focused on the technology. They're focused on interesting product designs. They're not just here to make a quick dollar. I know there's lots of noise in this market, lots of scam projects, lots of kind of fake ICOs. When the market slows down a little bit, at the very least, it gives us some confidence that there's less incentive for these fake projects to launch, because it's not like the market is growing 10 times every month like it was last year. So we find this to be a good thing for now.
Yeah, definitely. I think that projects which have long-term goals like yours, they will succeed in any case.
Yeah.
So no need to check like if it's AION $2 or 11 like it was in January. It's maybe important for some people who invested, but not important in the long-term perspective.
I think what we remind ourselves very regularly, and we remind people who follow us, is that AION's success will be decided on a very long-term time horizon. We're building the AION Foundation to be a sustainable organization for the next 10, 20, 50 years. The type of infrastructure we need to build is a never-ending roadmap of new maturity that needs to be built, right? So in our current design, we have 2 years of established roadmap. We have a very, very deliberate research team looking at what do we do beyond the next 2 years. This is going to be a never-ending kind of process of maturing infrastructure, right? So if people align themselves with the right project, it really is kind of aligning yourselves with a roadmap that's going to be, or a set of a vision that's going to take us more than a decade to kind of roll out. This is not a quick turnaround to make the industry efficient in 1 year. It's not going to happen. It's going to take us a long time.
Yeah. Also, yesterday you said that AION is always hiring, and you are looking also for developers in Kyiv. And did you find some developers, or did you receive, I don't know, some application resumes already from Ukrainian developers? And which developers are you looking particularly?
Yeah,
maybe
sure.
Developers are watching us. And
yeah, we met a lot of interesting people yesterday. There's a few companies that we've spoken to after the meetup last night that have some developers here. I think the big difference with what we're developing in Kyiv and Ukraine in general, we know there's a lot of deep technical talent in a lot of cities in the Ukraine. Our focus is very much on core infrastructure. We're a core engineering team, so that means we're designing the operating system, we're designing the consensus algorithms, we're designing the kernel of the technology. We don't do much or any work at the application layer, right? So it's, in terms of the type of resources, I'll tell you that my co-founder Jin is always looking for like the best and brightest minds that have deep backgrounds in mathematics, deep backgrounds in kind of operating system design, virtual machine design. So this is kind of the layer that we work on, because there's a never-ending list of priorities that we need to research, test, do proof of concepts on. So the way that we are kind of looking around for developers is that we have a couple of centralized hubs around the world. We have a team in Shanghai, we have a team in Toronto, a team in Barbados, and a partner company in Romania that we work with, but we're also just open to the idea that the best developers could come from anywhere. So I mean, if there are developers watching that focus on kind of this low-level infrastructure, then we're always open to talking to new people.
Okay, so you are not right now focused on opening new offices, but you can work with developers distantly.
We may open new offices. It really depends where we find talent. We have kind of an open. We're pretty open to the idea that if there's enough talent that comes from a new region of the world, we may go and open an office. We just started opening our office in mainland China maybe 1 month ago because we realized that there was a deep talent pool there and a good market opportunity in the Asian market. It's the same thing in Europe. So if there were an opportunity, if we found the right talent, we could theoretically consider opening an office somewhere else as well.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks for interesting conversation. Hopefully see you in Ukraine next time.
Yeah,
maybe
for sure.
this September there would be DC10 conference. Probably you mentioned you were in Ukraine last year.
Yep.
It was maybe for that.
Yeah, D10E. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, we were here last year. I think we'll definitely be back. We're going to be spending a lot more time in Eastern Europe in general. I know we're going to be back in the region definitely at least one more time this year. So looking forward to be back in Kyiv.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.